It was a breezy spring afternoon in suburban Meadowbrook, a neighborhood known for its manicured lawns, white picket fences, and a quiet that bordered on eerie at times. For years, the area had prided itself on being a close-knit community, though unspoken undercurrents of prejudice often simmered beneath its pristine surface. For Martin Hayes, a new resident, the move to Meadowbrook was meant to symbolize a fresh start, a serene retreat after years of grueling work in law enforcement. Before we start, smash the like and subscribe buttons for more updates. Martin, a tall, muscular black man in his early 40s with a disarming smile, had recently purchased a modest but charming house on Maple Drive. To anyone who knew him, Martin was the epitome of dedication. As an FBI agent, his work had taken him across the country, often pulling him into some of the darkest corners of humanity. Despite his accomplishments, he had learned over the years that to many people his skin color was the first thing they noticed, and sometimes the only thing they cared about. His neighbor, Patricia Morgan, embodied the stereotypical nosy neighbor. A woman in her late 50s with perfectly coiffed blonde hair and a perpetual scowl, she prided herself on being the unofficial watchdog of the neighborhood. Patricia knew everyone's routines, from the mailman's arrival to the exact time the Johnsons' teenager snuck out at night. When Martin moved in, Patricia's curiosity quickly turned to suspicion. She didn't trust the way he kept to himself, or the fact that his friends, many of them black men and women, occasionally visited for cookouts. To her, he was an outsider, and in her mind, outsiders spelled trouble. One Saturday morning, Martin stood in his driveway waxing his car under the warm sun. He had just finished his third cup of coffee and was enjoying the rare weekend off when he noticed Patricia peeking at him through the curtains of her living room. She had been doing this for weeks, but Martin, used to people's stares, ignored her. He hummed to himself as he worked, oblivious to the storm brewing next door. Patricia, meanwhile, had convinced herself that Martin's presence signaled impending doom for the neighborhood. She had already circulated whispered concerns at the last HOA meeting, suggesting that certain elements were threatening Meadowbrook's safety. Encouraged by the subtle nods of agreement from others, Patricia decided to take matters into her own hands. As Martin moved to clean the interior of his car, he noticed a police cruiser pulling up to the curb. Two officers stepped out, their expressions unreadable. Martin straightened up, wiping his hands on a rag as they approached him. "Good morning, officers," he said, his voice calm and steady. Years of training had taught him to maintain his composure in tense situations. "Sir, we received a report of suspicious activity in the area," one officer said, glancing at Martin's car and then at him. "Do you live here?" "Yes, I do," Martin replied, reaching for his wallet to retrieve his ID. "I'm Martin Hayes. Is there a problem?" Before the officer could respond, Patricia came marching out of her house, her face flushed with indignation. "I called," she announced, pointing a finger at Martin. "I've seen him lurking around here, and I know he doesn't belong. He's up to no good." The officers exchanged uneasy glances. One of them turned to Patricia. "Ma'am, do you have any specific evidence of wrongdoing?" "He's always out here," Patricia snapped. "And he has all these people coming and going. It's not normal. I mean, look at him." Martin let out a slow breath, fighting the urge to roll his eyes. "Ma'am, I'm waxing my car," he said, gesturing to the bottle of car wax in his hand. "That's not exactly criminal activity." The tension in the air was palpable. The officers, clearly uncomfortable, asked Martin for proof of residency. He calmly handed over his ID, along with the deed to his house, which he had kept in his car for just such an occasion. As they inspected the documents, one of the officers noticed something else in Martin's wallet, his FBI badge. The atmosphere shifted instantly. The officers looked at each other, their expressions a mix of surprise and embarrassment. "Agent Hayes?" one of them said, his tone suddenly deferential. "We didn't realize." "Yes, I'm with the Bureau," Martin confirmed. "And for the record, I've lived here for 3 months. Now, can someone explain why I'm being harassed on my own property?" Patricia's face turned a deep shade of red. "You're with the FBI?" she stammered, her bravado crumbling. But what, ma'am?" Martin asked, his voice firm. "You assumed I was a criminal because of the color of my skin?" Patricia opened her mouth to respond but found herself at a loss for words. The officers, eager to defuse the situation, apologized profusely to Martin and assured him there would be no further issues. They offered a terse goodbye to Patricia, who retreated to her house without another word. As the cruiser drove away, a mix of anger and exhaustion washing over him. He had faced countless challenges in his life, but moments like these, moments where his identity was reduced to a stereotype, always cut deeper than he cared to admit. The incident didn't go unnoticed by the other neighbors. Word spread quickly, and many were horrified by Patricia's actions. Over the next few days, several residents stopped by Martin's house to apologize on her behalf and to assure him that not everyone in Meadowbrook shared her views. While Martin appreciated the gestures, he couldn't help but feel a lingering sense of unease. Trust, once broken, was not easily repaired. For Patricia, the aftermath was isolating. Her actions had alienated her from much of the community, and she found herself the subject of whispered conversations and cold stares. Despite her initial attempts to justify her behavior, it became clear that she had overstepped in a way that even her staunchest supporters couldn't defend. As for Martin, he resolved not to let the incident define his experience in Meadowbrook. He continued to live his life with the same quiet dignity that had always been his hallmark. Over time, he became a respected member of the community, hosting block parties and volunteering at local events. Yet the memory of that spring morning lingered, a stark reminder of the biases that still pervade even the most idyllic of neighborhoods. One evening, months after the incident, Patricia knocked on Martin's door. He hesitated before answering, unsure of what to expect. When he opened the door, he found her standing there, looking smaller and more vulnerable than he had ever seen her. "I wanted to apologize," she said softly. "What I did was wrong. I judged you without knowing you, and I'm sorry." Martin studied her for a moment before nodding. "Thank you," he said simply. "It takes courage to admit when you're wrong." Patricia nodded and left without further explanation. While her apology didn't erase the hurt she had caused, it was a step toward accountability, a small but significant gesture in a world that often shied away from confronting uncomfortable truths. Martin Hayes found himself thinking often about how life had brought him to this point. Growing up in Detroit, he had seen both the best and worst of humanity. His father, a retired Navy officer, had instilled in him a deep respect for discipline and justice, while his mother, a school teacher, had taught him the value of kindness and understanding. These lessons had shaped Martin into the man he was, someone who believed in standing up for what was right, even when it was uncomfortable. After graduating from college, Martin had joined the FBI. Driven by a desire to protect the vulnerable and to dismantle systems of corruption. He had spent over a decade working in counterintelligence, a role that demanded sharp instincts and the ability to remain calm under pressure. Over time, he had built a reputation for being unflappable, someone who could navigate the most complex situations with grace. Yet despite his professional accolades, Martin was not immune to the societal challenges that came with being a black man in America. Meadowbrook, with its tree-lined streets and quiet charm, had seemed like the perfect place to escape the high-stakes intensity of his job. When he first visited the neighborhood, he had been struck by its postcard-perfect appearance. It reminded him of the kind of community his parents had always dreamed of living in, a place where children played freely, neighbors greeted one another warmly, and life moved at a leisurely pace. But as the weeks passed, Martin began to notice the subtle ways in which he was treated differently. There were the lingering glances as he jogged through the neighborhood park, the overly polite but distant greetings from some of the residents, and of course, Patricia's unrelenting scrutiny. These microaggressions, though not overtly hostile, carried the weight of a deeper systemic prejudice that Martin had encountered many times before. The incident with Patricia and the police had been a jarring reminder of how quickly assumptions could escalate into something far more dangerous. While Martin was grateful that his position as an FBI agent had diffused the situation, he couldn't help but wonder how it might have unfolded if he hadn't had that badge. It was a sobering thought, one that lingered in the back of his mind as he went about his daily life. In the weeks following the incident, Martin received a call from his supervisor at the bureau. The case he had been working on, a multi-state operation to dismantle a human trafficking ring, was nearing a critical juncture, and his presence was needed back in the field. Though he had been enjoying the relative peace of suburban life, Martin knew he couldn't stay on the sidelines. His sense of duty outweighed his desire for rest. The operation was grueling, involving long hours of surveillance, high-stakes negotiations with informants, and the constant threat of danger. But Martin thrived under pressure, his years of experience serving him well. When the operation finally culminated in a series of coordinated raids that rescued dozens of victims and led to multiple arrests, Martin felt a sense of accomplishment that made all the sacrifices worthwhile. Returning to Meadowbrook after the operation, Martin was greeted by a new sense of purpose. He decided to channel his energy into fostering a stronger sense of community, one that could bridge the divides he had witnessed. He began attending HOA meetings, where he advocated for initiatives that promoted inclusivity, such as community potlucks and cultural awareness workshops. His efforts were met with a mix of enthusiasm and resistance, but Martin was undeterred. He knew that meaningful change took time and perseverance. "Because it's important," Martin replied firmly. "We can't keep pretending that everything is fine when there's so much we need to address. This is an opportunity for us to come together and really get to know each other." Despite the initial resistance, the block party turned out to be a resounding success. Held on a sunny Saturday afternoon, the event featured food from various cultures, games for children, and live music performed by local bands. For the first time, neighbors who had barely exchanged words found themselves laughing and sharing stories over plates of barbecue and homemade tamales. Even Patricia, despite her reservations, was seen chatting with a young couple who had recently moved in from Chicago. As the sun set and the party wound down, Martin felt a sense of hope that he hadn't experienced in a long time. It wasn't just about the event itself, it was about the connections being forged, the barriers being dismantled, and the possibility of a brighter future. But progress, Martin knew, was never linear. Just as the block party had brought the community closer, new challenges arose that tested their unity. A heated debate over a proposed affordable housing development in the area revealed deep-seated tensions that had been simmering beneath the surface. Some residents expressed concerns about property values and neighborhood character, while others, including Martin, argued for the importance of creating opportunities for families who might otherwise be excluded. The debates grew increasingly contentious, with accusations flying on both sides. Martin found himself in the middle of the fray, trying to mediate while staying true to his principles. It was exhausting work, but he refused to give up. He believed that the fight for justice and equity was worth every ounce of effort. One evening, as he prepared for yet another HOA meeting, Martin received an unexpected visitor. It was Patricia. She stood on his doorstep, clutching a stack of papers and looking uncharacteristically nervous. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said," she began, her voice hesitant, "about how we need to address the things we've been avoiding." Martin raised an eyebrow. "Go on." "I want to help," she said, holding out the papers. "I did some research on how other neighborhoods have handled similar issues. I thought maybe we could use these ideas as a starting point." Martin took the papers and skimmed through them, impressed by the thoroughness of her research. "This is a good start," he admitted. "Thank you." Patricia nodded, a hint of relief crossing her face. "I know I've been part of the problem," she said quietly, "but I want to change that. I want to be part of the solution." It was a moment of vulnerability that Martin hadn't expected, but it reminded him of something his mother used to say: "People can surprise you if you give them the chance." While he wasn't ready to fully trust Patricia just yet, he appreciated her willingness to take responsibility and make amends. As the months passed, Meadowbrook began to evolve. The affordable housing development was eventually approved, thanks in large part to Martin's advocacy and the support of a growing number of residents who shared his vision. The community potlucks became a regular tradition, bringing people together in ways that had once seemed impossible. And while not everyone embraced the changes, the overall atmosphere of the neighborhood began to shift toward one of openness and acceptance. For Martin, the journey was far from over. He knew that the fight against prejudice and inequality was a lifelong endeavor, one that required constant vigilance and effort. But as he stood on his porch one evening, watching children play in the street and neighbors chat over fences, he felt a profound sense of gratitude. He had found a place in Meadowbrook, not just as a resident, but as a catalyst for change. It was a role he hadn't anticipated when he first moved in, but one that he now embraced wholeheartedly. Because in the end, Martin Hayes wasn't just a man who lived in Meadowbrook. He was a man who believed in its potential to be better, and he was willing to do whatever it took to make that vision a reality. The transformation of Meadowbrook was slow but undeniable. In the years following the incident with Patricia, the community began to shed its veneer of polite indifference and embrace a more authentic engagement with one another. Martin Hayes became a central figure in this shift, a reluctant hero to some and a steadfast advocate to others. His unwavering commitment to justice, equity, and connection touched lives in ways even he did not fully comprehend. One of the pivotal moments in this transformation came when Martin proposed the formation of a neighborhood action committee. The committee would address ongoing issues within Meadowbrook, ranging from infrastructure improvements to fostering inclusivity. While the idea received mixed reactions at first, Martin's persuasive nature and his track record of success eventually won over even some of the staunchest skeptics. Patricia, having embraced her role as a reformed ally, volunteered to co-chair the committee alongside Martin, a gesture that surprised many. The committee organized fundraisers, applied for grants, and reached out to local businesses for donations. Martin took the lead in securing a partnership with a non-profit organization that specialized in urban park revitalization. Through his connections, he managed to bring in volunteers from the Bureau and other community organizations, further demonstrating his commitment to bridging divides. The restoration project quickly became a symbol of Meadowbrook's newfound unity. Residents who had never spoken to one another found themselves working side by side, painting benches, planting flowers, and repairing equipment. Children, who had previously been confined to their own yards, began to play together, their laughter echoing through the park. On the day of the grand reopening, the park was nearly unrecognizable. The playground gleamed with fresh paint, the basketball courts were resurfaced and fitted with new hoops, and a mural celebrating the diversity of the community adorned one of the walls. The mural, designed by a local artist, featured images of Meadowbrook's residents, including Martin, Patricia, and several children from the neighborhood. The ribbon-cutting ceremony was a joyous occasion, attended by nearly every family in Meadowbrook. Martin, ever modest, gave a short speech emphasizing the collective effort that had made the project possible. "This park is a testament to what we can achieve when we work together," he said. "It's a reminder that our differences don't have to divide us. They can strengthen us." The park became a hub of activity, hosting everything from soccer games to outdoor movie nights. It was also where the annual Meadowbrook Cultural Festival took root, another initiative spearheaded by Martin and the Neighborhood Action Committee. The festival celebrated the diverse backgrounds of Meadowbrook's residents, featuring food, music, and performances from various cultures. It quickly became the highlight of the year, drawing visitors from surrounding neighborhoods and fostering a sense of pride in the community. Despite these successes, challenges continued to arise. Change, as Martin often reminded himself, was never easy. There were still moments of tension, such as when a heated debate erupted over the introduction of a community policing program. The program, designed to improve relations between law enforcement and residents, was viewed by some as a necessary step toward accountability, and by others as an unwelcome intrusion. As an FBI agent, Martin found himself uniquely positioned to mediate the discussion. Drawing on his own experiences, he spoke candidly about the importance of trust and communication between law enforcement and the communities they serve. He also advocated for training sessions that focused on de-escalation techniques and implicit bias, which he believed were essential for fostering a safer and more equitable environment. One of the most rewarding aspects of Martin's efforts was the mentorship program he established for the neighborhood's youth. Recognizing that many young people lacked positive role models, he recruited volunteers from various professions to provide guidance and support. The program offered workshops on everything from financial literacy to career development, as well as recreational activities that fostered teamwork and confidence. Martin took a particularly active role in mentoring a teenager named Jamal, who lived with his grandmother a few houses down. Jamal was bright and curious, but often found himself at odds with authority figures. Through regular conversations and shared experiences, Martin helped Jamal channel his energy into productive pursuits, encouraging him to pursue his dream of becoming an engineer. One afternoon, as they worked on a model bridge for a school project, Jamal asked a question that stopped Martin in his tracks. "Do you ever get tired of fighting for people to see you for who you really are?" Martin set down the piece of balsa wood he was holding and looked at Jamal thoughtfully. "All the time," he admitted. "But if I don't, who will? It's not just about me. It's about making sure the next generation, your generation, has a better shot at being seen for who you are and what you can do." Jamal nodded, his expression serious. "I want to do that too," he said. "I want to make things better." It was moments like these that reminded Martin why he had chosen to make Meadowbrook his home, despite the challenges. The work was hard, often frustrating, but it was also deeply fulfilling. Each small victory, a repaired park bench, a resolved conflict, a teenager finding his path, was a step toward the kind of community he believed was possible. As Meadowbrook continued to evolve, so did Martin. He found himself letting go of some of the walls he had built over the years, opening himself up to deeper connections with his neighbors. He struck up an unlikely friendship with a retired teacher named Mr. Alvarez, who shared his love of history and often invited him over for spirited debates about politics and philosophy. He also began dating a woman named Olivia, a social worker who had recently moved to the neighborhood. Olivia's warmth, and resilience complemented Martin's steady determination, and their relationship became a source of joy in his otherwise demanding life. Though Martin's story was deeply personal, it also reflected a broader narrative about the complexities of race, community, and change in America. Meadowbrook, with all its imperfections, became a microcosm of these struggles and triumphs. A place where progress was measured not in grand gestures, but in the quiet, persistent efforts of individuals willing to challenge the status quo. Years later, as Martin stood at the edge of the park he had helped restore, watching children play and neighbors laugh together, he felt a profound sense of peace. The journey had been far from easy, but it had been worth it. Meadowbrook was not a perfect place, nor would it ever be, but it was a place where people were trying, where conversations were happening, and where progress, however slow, was being made. For Martin Hayes, that was enough, because in the end, change wasn't about erasing the past. It was about building a better future, one brick, one conversation, one act of courage at a time. As time passed, Meadowbrook became a beacon of resilience, a community with a story that reflected both its struggles and triumphs. Martin Hayes continued to be a driving force behind the neighborhood's evolution, but he was no longer alone in his efforts. What began as his vision for a more inclusive and connected community had blossomed into a shared mission embraced by many of its residents. One of the most notable changes was the emergence of new leadership within the Neighborhood Action Committee. Younger residents, inspired by Martin's advocacy and determination, began stepping forward to take on roles of responsibility. Among them was Claire Simmons, a local teacher who had moved to Meadowbrook with her young daughter. Claire had been hesitant to get involved at first, uncertain if her voice would be heard, but Martin's encouragement helped her realize her potential. Under Claire's leadership, the committee launched a series of educational programs aimed at fostering empathy and understanding among Meadowbrook's diverse residents. These programs included storytelling workshops where individuals shared their personal experiences of prejudice and belonging. The stories, raw and heartfelt, opened the eyes of many and deepened the bonds within the community. Martin often attended these workshops not as a leader, but as a participant, sharing his own journey while listening to others. One evening, during one such workshop, a man named Sam Owens stood up to speak. Sam, a middle-aged mechanic who had lived in Meadowbrook for over a decade, had often kept to himself. "I used to think all this talk about change didn't matter," he began, his voice gruff but steady. "But then I saw how this neighborhood started coming together, how my kids now have friends they might not have had before. That's because of the work you're all doing. It's because of people like Martin." The room fell silent, the weight of Sam's words settling over everyone. Martin, seated at the back, felt a lump in his throat. He had never sought recognition for his efforts, but moments like this reminded him that even the smallest ripples of change could create a powerful current. As Meadowbrook's reputation for inclusivity grew, it began to attract families from diverse backgrounds. The neighborhood, once homogeneous and insular, transformed into a vibrant mosaic of cultures and traditions. This influx of new residents brought fresh perspectives and ideas, further enriching the community's fabric. Martin took particular pride in watching Meadowbrook evolve into the kind of place where everyone, regardless of their background, could find a sense of belonging. Despite the progress, Martin remained acutely aware of the work that still lay ahead. Prejudice and bias, though diminished, had not disappeared entirely. There were still moments of friction, still conversations that needed to be had, but Martin embraced these challenges as opportunities for growth, viewing them not as obstacles but as part of the ongoing journey toward understanding and unity. In his quieter moments, Martin often reflected on how far Meadowbrook had come since that fateful day when Patricia had called the police on him. What could have been a moment of division and defeat had instead become a catalyst for transformation. It was a testament to the power of resilience, empathy, and the willingness to confront difficult truths. As Martin sat on his porch one evening, watching the golden hues of the setting sun cast a warm glow over the neighborhood, he felt a profound sense of fulfillment. Meadowbrook had become more than just a place to live. It was a community where people cared for one another, where differences were celebrated rather than feared, and where hope flourished even in the face of adversity. For Martin Hayes, this was more than enough. It was proof that, with courage and determination, change was not only possible, it was inevitable. Meadowbrook's journey toward transformation was far from linear, and Martin Hayes, ever the realist, understood that maintaining progress required constant vigilance. The evolution of the neighborhood brought with it both opportunities and challenges, as the influx of new residents also introduced new dynamics. While most embraced the spirit of inclusivity that had taken root, there were still occasional clashes, misunderstandings, and even resistance from those who struggled to adapt to the changes. One such instance arose when the community's zoning board proposed converting an old unused warehouse into a cultural center. The center was envisioned as a space for hosting workshops, art exhibits, and performances that celebrated the diverse backgrounds of Meadowbrook's residents. While the proposal excited many, a small but vocal group of residents voiced concerns about traffic congestion and potential noise. Beneath these logistical arguments, however, lingered a more subtle resistance to change. Martin, now a trusted advisor to the zoning board, took it upon himself to facilitate a series of town hall meetings to address these concerns. He knew that fostering dialogue was the only way to bridge the gap between opposing perspectives. Over several weeks, the meetings became a forum for open discussion, where residents could air their grievances and share their hopes for the project. One particularly memorable meeting ended with a breakthrough. A resident named Alice, who had initially opposed the cultural center, stood up and admitted that her objections were rooted in fear. "I was afraid that I wouldn't belong anymore," she confessed, "that this neighborhood would become something I didn't recognize. But after hearing what this center could mean for us, for our kids, I realized that I was wrong." Her vulnerability prompted an outpouring of support from others, and the proposal was eventually approved. The cultural center, once completed, became a cornerstone of Meadowbrook's identity, hosting everything from language classes to multicultural film screenings. It was a place where residents could learn about one another's traditions, breaking down barriers through shared experiences. Meanwhile, Martin continued to nurture relationships within the neighborhood, often through small but meaningful gestures. He organized impromptu barbecues in his backyard, where neighbors from all walks of life gathered to share food and laughter. He also made a point of mentoring new leaders within the community, ensuring that the momentum for progress didn't rest solely on his shoulders. One of Martin's proudest moments came when Jamal, the teenager he had mentored, was accepted to a prestigious engineering program. At a celebration held in Jamal's honor, the young man gave a heartfelt speech, crediting Martin for his guidance and support. "You taught me to believe in myself," Jamal said, his voice steady with emotion. "And now I want to make you proud by helping others the way you helped me." If you liked this video, please give it a like and subscribe to our channel. Also, leave your comments below and tell us, what are your thoughts on a racist neighbor calling the cops on a black man? We want to hear from you. Thank you for watching and see you next time.